Thank you so much, Sandra. I'm just going to quickly through the questions, and I think Kate has answered one that was directed to her. So I have a question basically for everyone on the panel, and it's just asking about, we haven't really mentioned, Ewan touched on it briefly, and also, by the way, I'd like to invite Hana back, and you could be a part of this, some conversations. But in light of what COVID has sort of accelerated and exaggerated as part of issues, we kind of see this tension between natural and cultural heritage coming to the forefront of people's minds, particularly as we've been forced to isolate inside. But at the same time, government rhetoric being more about streamlining planning, putting heritage low on the agenda, and even some might say putting the climate crisis lower on the agenda. And I was just wondering what each of you thought about those different kind of tensions that are being played out, whether it's the pandemic has showed us how important the climate crisis is and nature and cultural heritage, but at the same time, it seems to be going lower and lower as a government response when in trying to kind of boost the economy. And if I could ask Ewan first.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'd like to try and maybe turn that on its head and look on the current pandemic as an opportunity, as we keep hearing, to build back better, to have checked where we are, and allow some space for thinking. So the opportunities are clearly there in terms of the economic regeneration packages that are appearing, and if that's done right, there's a chance to align those with more long-term and sustainable objectives, which of course is entirely in line with climate change objectives. That's easy to say, and obviously there's a sort of mixed response to that, in that some of the recovery actions that are being proposed, road building, for example, don't align with that. But I do think it's a great opportunity for the heritage sector to shout louder and to engage. I mentioned issues about high streets. We're facing a significant change in retail, and we may never go back to working from offices in the way that we did before. And I think the heritage sector really needs to engage with that. And we have a very strong track record of heritage-led regeneration in terms of bringing life back into city centres, and a very good proven track record. So I think there's an opportunity there, and a challenge for us to pick that up.
Kate?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I think we've got so much to learn from the COVID response. Again, I can't really talk so much about the heritage world because that's not really my world, but lots of things around how we've used risk information. Have we built our response based on the science? We can learn so much about how different countries responded, and those who moved first, they tended to protect their system a lot better. And how to be better prepared, and trying to make the case for being better prepared. That sometimes people don't want to make investments to allow for redundancy or headroom in the system, but actually to try and make the economic case that is worth doing. I think, hopefully from a climate change perspective, we can learn a lot about why that's valuable to do based on COVID. But sorry, that's not very much about heritage.
Sandra, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a good opportunity as well to kind of put forward the argument for heritage and the importance of it to local communities, as we are going to begin to see obviously quite substantial changes in the way we interact in society due to the pandemic and the pandemic response. But I think with heritage, what we see through COVID and the way in which individuals and different places have responded is the importance of heritage and what they actually contribute to communities.
And Hannah, I know that you had some questions that you wanted to ask as well to some of the panel, and I also encourage others to ask each other questions as well.
Can I also just make a couple of points on that question that you just asked? I think the points about the long-term thinking process that we can bring are very important here, because what we see in crisis situations is very reactive, often very short-term responses, and I think it's very easy to lose sight of the long-term issues. And we see this an awful lot with climate change policy, the reactions to needing to reduce operational carbon that lose sight of the need to adapt the future climate scenarios, for instance, or where in trying to address thermal efficiency in buildings, we cause problems of overheating when we know that we're facing summers with extreme temperatures that are going to be much more intense. So that's going to be a bigger problem, which could in turn lead to increases in mechanical cooling, those sorts of things. I also think that the focus on people and our understanding of people and places through time is really critical. As Ewan says, high streets are changing, but it's not the first time and it won't be the last time. And we can bring a perspective on that and use that to help both reassure and shape. And I think heritage, if it's used right, is an incredibly powerful tool for navigating that. Also thinking about lockdown and experience, I know everyone's had very different experiences, but people have had a much closer relationship to their immediate places. It's not with the big ticket heritage places, it's with their immediate environment when you can only go for a short walk each day in your home town and in your village and your city. You learn different things about it, and I know I've learned new things about where I live, and I think we've got an opportunity to really try and build on that. The other thing is, where do people turn in the digital sphere? What is it that people were seeking in the free time that some people had? I know not everyone had additional time, but people were using their time differently, and I think I'd be really interested to see how heritage resources were used, because I know a lot of people seem to be engaging much more places where there were virtual tours and that sort of thing, and understanding and the opportunities for learning and engaging. I think we're very interested in that through the online space that we haven't always been as quick to engage with. The question I wanted to ask was about that maladaptation and about how we can try and avoid that. And Kate, I had a kind of interest from your perspective on how bringing together that challenge for net zero and achieving that with the need to adapt, avoiding lock-in and maladaptation and unintended negative consequences, and how you see heritage as potentially helping in that sphere.
Yeah, I've always seen climate adaptation as one of many drivers. So net zero is clearly currently one of the biggest drivers, but there's obviously others around biodiversity loss and changes in demographics. So how do all of these things match, sort of overlay onto a system? And the other thing about adaptation to climate change is that it is very locally, it's very context specific and locally specific. So I think there's a lot that heritage can do, and it sort of partly relates to things like Caitlin's work around how do we tell the stories, how have we told these stories, and how can we tell them differently? In terms of a locality brings together is an opportunity to overlay a lot of different sort of narratives and stories and perspectives, and to sort of have these sort of jointly told tales about a particular locality. As an opportunity to sort of be able to bring that complexity together without trying to oversimplify it. And so I think organisations like the National Trust and the Historic England can have a role then in that sort of how do you do this sort of learning history and bringing in these multiple voices in a way that sort of challenges our thinking, helps us think about times, moments at which things could have gone onto a different path, and to think about how we might have got locked into a certain way of doing something, but what opportunities were there to change things, and what opportunities do we still have to change things?
Thank you. Ewan, have you got I'm interested in your answer to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, one of the bread and butters for us in the heritage sector is significance of place and value. And significance is generally about layers of change. Most of our heritage places record change through time. And we have, in many ways, I think, a unique insight into that, into the understanding that things have always changed, places have always changed. And that's a very powerful tool for us to utilize to discuss future change in terms of climate change, particularly with other sectors who don't have that appreciation of time and the value of change and how change has been a part of development of society and place and history. So I think again it's for our sector to stand up and say we have a resource here. We have a knowledge base and a resource that is a tool that could be used to help communicate understanding around climate change, and indeed to help build resilience to communities who are concerned about change.
Right. And Sandra.
I'd agree very much with Ewan's point of how we can use changes throughout time to inform communities and talk about adaptation. I think actually you had mentioned in one of the earlier talks today how we're almost becoming too good at adapting, and I think that's really important as well. I think it's a really interesting point that was made, and I think that's it. Once we start interacting with the communities and use it to raise awareness, we start to kind of, I suppose, understand the needs of the local communities and what they place importance in and what we can achieve through interacting with the communities, because it is changing environments that people have been living in. Some of the environments that, in church that we've been working in, we're seeing huge losses of land occurring in specific areas. And when we talk to locals, they're discussing the loss of land that's occurring, and they're telling us exactly how much land has been lost. So I think it's something that communities are really aware of, but in some ways we just need to, I suppose, transcend that information, maybe to start to achieve something a little further along the lines of what we can expect of communities and what we can expect of different stakeholders and groups to realistically be able to give back to the communities as well.
Thank you. We're past our time for this panel, so I just want to thank Sandra, Ewan, and Kate for their contribution, and also Hana for co-chairing the session. So thank you so much for that. And